Alright lads, welcome back to another War Thunder vehicle review. Today we're taking a look at the French Mephisto, at least that's how I think it's pronounced. Anyway, this is basically a 4x4 missile carrier, which is pretty sneaky and is very effective in game. At least that's how I feel about it from the game that I've had. This wheelie boy is obviously in the French tech tree, sitting at battle rating 8.3 for arcade, realistic and sim, and it's in the 6th rank. This 6th rank placement is actually pretty nice, as well as the 8.3 battle rating. We've got a nice French 8.3 lineup, and because of the missiles that this thing has, you can still even use it at 11.0 as well. It's that effective. Let's not get ahead of ourselves, let's talk about the research cost. So to actually unlock this thing, you are going to have to grind out 270,000 research points, which is a little bit of a pain in the arse, and to purchase it, it's also 740,000 silver lions. To put the vehicle in your lineup, it's going to cost you 210,000 silver lions, again a bit of a pain. And for the expert and ace qualifications, it's 740,000 silver lions and 2,100 golden eagles respectively. It's also got a pretty high repair cost for realistic battles of nearly 10,000 silver lions, but it's not the highest in the world and you should get a few kills with this little boy. So lads, with its 10 degrees of gun depression, thermal imaging, and high power missiles, is a Mephisto worth your time grinding out? Or like a lot of the other vehicles in the French tech tree, is it largely dead on arrival? Starting as always with the basics, and the Mephisto is powered by an engine producing 220 horsepower, which isn't the best, but combined with the vehicle's weight of 13.8 tons, gives the tank a pretty respectable power to weight ratio of 15.9 horsepower per ton. For a wheeled vehicle, this isn't actually too bad. Obviously, because it doesn't have tracks, its power to weight ratio is never going to be as good. It's a weird thing with War Thunder where wheeled vehicles always seem to have very low traction and pretty bad acceleration. But the Mephisto is pretty nimble in general. It also has a top speed of 91 km per hour going forwards and 10 km per hour in reverse. This gives you pretty good tactical flexibility. You can kind of zip around the battlefield fairly quickly. You don't have the best acceleration, but it's still more than good enough in my opinion to have a tactical effect. Like you can get to a spawn in the early part of the game and get into a good position. And at a low battle rating of 8.3, there are still quite a lot of the heavier tanks around, so your mobility is a decent advantage. It's not like 9.3 where most of the tanks are very fast, so this is a big positive for the Mephisto. Something that definitely isn't a positive though is the survivability, and I'm basically not even going to cover the armor section on this tank because it's 8mm thick everywhere, so it's not really worth your time going over it. As you'd expect though, the survivability is abysmal. It's a 4x4 basically car. It's got a bit of armor over the driver's windscreen, but it's not really going to do anything. I actually think the thickest part of this tank's armor is actually the rubber tyres somehow. Pretty funny, but it's not survivable at all. It's not exactly a weakness though, because it's a light tank. You want to be as light as possible to get around the map. As I said, the tank is mobile enough though, so you shouldn't really be relying on your armor anyway. Fight, shoot and scoot, just run away from the enemy if you see them coming close. You've got the maneuverability, the armor isn't worth it. So that being said, how do we actually get kills? Well my dear viewers, the Mephisto is armed with the Hot ATGMs, both the Hot 1 and the Hot 2, but we'll cover that shortly. You have 12 rounds of ammunition, or missiles I guess more specifically, and these missiles are carried in 4 tubes above the vehicle. Kind of like a lot of the other missile carriers in the game, once you fire all of these 4 tubes at the top, the system will then depress and reloading will begin. This takes around 15 seconds when stock, but obviously decreases depending on your crew level. As I said, this missile firing thing has vertical guidance of plus or minus 10 degrees, so you have 10 degrees of gun depression and 10 degrees of elevation. This makes it incredibly good for going hull down. Because the missile launcher are actually above the vehicle by quite a substantial margin, you can actually expose the missile tubes but not expose the crew, which can make this tank a little bit overpowered in some maps, especially got rolling hills, like Hertenberg Forest where you've got lots of hills and not much cover in the middle of the map. You can just snipe people from basically their spawn, which is a bit dick move, but that's kind of the meta in War Thunder now. It actually does have a 2-point gun stabilizer for some reason. Not too sure why they thought that was a necessity. You can't actually fire this gun on the move, so not too sure why they added that to this tank, but it's a nice addition no matter the less. We also have a first generation thermal camera for the gunner's sight. You don't actually have a commander's CCIV in this thing, obviously. While it's not the best in the world, just having a Gen 1 thermal sight is better than no thermal sight. And at battle rating 8.3, we can't really complain about not having a better thermal in my opinion. It's good enough to acquire a target. You shouldn't really be using thermals when you're firing the missile anyway. Use the thermals to find a target, then switch back to the normal camera to actually engage it. That's my recommendation. But let's cover the ammunition. Our stock round is the Hot 1, or just the Hot. This is like the European equivalent of the TOW missile. It has a maximum range of 4 kilometers, which isn't too good when it comes to helicopters, but for tanks and for light tanks, it's alright. The maximum speed is a little bit slow though, only 250 meters per second. It makes it a bit hard to engage enemy helicopters if you do try to do that. And if you're shooting across the map, enemies will have a long time to react. This missile uses a high explosive anti-tank warhead, as you'd expect, containing 3.8 kilos of TNT filler. This gives it pretty good post-penetration damage, and with a raw statistic penetration of 700mm, you can certainly do a lot of damage with this missile. Things do get a lot better though with our next missile, the Hot 2. Whereas the Hot 1 was 136mm in diameter, the Hot 2 is 150mm in diameter. Those of you who don't know, high explosive anti-tank warheads, as well as all chemical rounds really, their effectiveness is depending on the diameter of the shell itself. So obviously a thicker shell contains more explosive powder, giving it more chemical power really. This is kind of the opposite to kinetic energy projectors, which want to have a long shell with a very narrow impact point. Just a cool physics tip from Sako. Anyway, because the Hot 2 has a slightly bigger diameter, we actually have 200mm more penetration, which brings us up to 900mm of flat pen. We also have a larger TNT warhead, now containing 4.87 kilos of TNT, giving it even better post-penetration damage. Once you unlock the Hot 2, there is no reason at all to go back to the Hot 1, it is a pure upgrade, so that simplifies things quite a lot. This missile is certainly very deadly. It's not the fastest in the world, but you can't really complain. With all that being said lads, let's go on to the nitty gritty. The lineup. The French 8.3 lineup is actually pretty decent in my opinion. Ironically enough, we also have the AMX with the 6 hot missiles. That's actually pretty good alongside this. You then have that weird Austrian light tank with the high power gun with the high resolution thermal imaging. That's also very good at 8.3. You also have the anti-aircraft gun. The only real bad thing about the French 8.3 lineup is that you don't have a good CAS option in my opinion. So for the lineup, I'd give it a 4 out of 5. Is it new player friendly? Well, I'd say it is and it isn't. You need to kind of have good map knowledge. You obviously aren't going to be able to rely on your armor to keep you alive, and you certainly can't brawl with this tank. So for new player friendliness, I'd give it a 3 out of 5. Is it a good value for grind? Well, the Mephisto currently sits at the end of the French light tank tree, so it doesn't really have anything past it. So if you are trying to go for the Leclerc or the French top tier lineup, then it's kind of a dead end. But because it is a missile wheeled vehicle with 900mm of penetration, granted it's not a tandem charge missile, so it's not going to be effective against ERA at the top tiers, but I'd still say you can use this at a 11.0 lineup easily and still be very effective. So I'd say it's a 4 out of 5 for value for grind. Is this tank meta? I'd say it is actually at battle rating 8.3 and again at top tier. It's fast, mobile, and you don't have to expose the vulnerable part of the tank in order to get kills. The missiles with 900mm of penetration can pretty much kill anything 8.3 upwards. So I'd say it's 4 out of 5 for the meta. And is this tank cool? Well, I'd normally knock a lot of points off it for being French, but because it's a special relationship, I'll waver that this once. I'd say that this is again 4 out of 5 for coolness. The tank does look pretty cool, especially when the missiles are down reloading. It looks kind of sleek, kind of like a Mad Max Tesla truck. But anyway lads, I strongly recommend you grind this vehicle. I had a lot of fun playing it. I've been trying to grind out the French 8.3 lineup, and I've had a lot of fun playing it with the Mephisto. While it can be quite hard to get up to this battle rating, the French tech tree is pretty brutal. It's not really that great until you get to the Leclercs. I would say if you can stomach it, then the Mephisto is well worth it. Anyway lads, thank you very much for watching this video. If you did enjoy it, please do consider leaving a like and subscribing. And if you loved the video, consider becoming a channel member, like Wolfyfly, Joseph Metcalf, Tomster013, Just Someone, Dr. Bob, Deboa LX, Tans, William Tessier, and Lola Alfonsi. Thank you very much for becoming members, lads, and I'll see you in the next review.